Hi. How are you?
Pretty good. How about you?
All right. Hey, Jesse. How are you?
Hey, pretty good. It's been a good week of things coming along. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. It's been a pretty good week. We've been. I guess this is. I'm always trying to figure out what happened this week because it's like they kind of meld together. But I submitted the MetaBrains paper this week, so that's. And then I got an alert about the other A-Life paper, so that's going to probably go out. The deadline for that is the end of the month, so that'll go out. And working on some other things lab-related, and we'll talk about that later. Especially with respect to recruitment of people, new people, or if old people want to join in on what we're doing, that's fine. But we're going to have more defined roles. We're working on this idea of different roles that people might do that, you know, kind of gives them a little bit more of a investment in what's going on. So I think it's going to be useful for people. I think, you know, we kind of started out with people just kind of coming in and learning things and having sort of their own interests, which is good. But I think it's also good to have people who, like, they have sort of a formal thing that they do in the lab, like a position that they can take ownership of. So, like Jesse is sort of a lab manager and also sort of an organizer for different initiatives, you know, just kind of doing that sort of thing. And so that's something that he developed here. You know, when he came here, he was applied as a Google Summer of Code student, so he kind of found a place in that area. And it was, you know, I think it's been good for Jesse, and it's definitely been good for the lab that we've been able to do that. And so Angela is also kind of developing her own set of skills. And so, you know, this is something that we can think about in terms of a role. How do you take some skills that you're kind of working on, you know, you're kind of building something towards some sort of specialty that you can point to say this is something that I can do well, and this is something we'll do, you know, in the lab on a regular basis. I can practice my skills, you know, do academic work, and then maybe even like stuff that's broader than that, like, you know, startups or other things. So if Angela, if you have any ideas about like how you want to define yourself, or things you want to, as in that role that you want to promote, that would be great. I mean, I think that would be something you could do. Would be very helpful. Yeah, I can hear you.
So I hate identity on like a philosophical ground, but I am happy to, like, what do you think your lab needs the most? Because I tend to be a pretty adaptable person, and I think it's better to figure out what you think is necessary for the lab's growth, and I can see if I can fit that role. Because I prefer the ability to switch roles, so, like, that's what I liked about my old organization. Like, I could jump from being a crisis counselor to working in policy to, you know, like.
Well, that's a good idea. I mean, we haven't really talked about it in that way. I think probably that would be fine if you want to just pick things up as they come along, and that's fine. I don't. Like, we're kind of working on it right now, so I can't I can't give you something now, but you know, we'll be working on this over the fall. So yeah, we'll talk about this later with some of the descriptions and things like that. So go ahead.
In terms of self-improvement, I would like to improve my technical skills, just because right now I only have some training in, say, data science-y stuff, and very little, like I only have like boot camp and lead code programming experience, and I want to be able to make real shit, because last month I tried to make real shit and it did not work out. Like I spent all of last month being really sleepy instead. So this month I'm going to try again, this time with my sleep much better adjusted, and hope that it goes well. But yeah, I do hope to become much more of a technical person this year than I have any other.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, we talked about like data science and training before, things like that. So that's kind of one of the things that we were talking about. And then, you know, there are different roles. So there's like an expert who could come in and build things, but then there are also people who might get to do that over time if they have the exposure to things. So we'll have to think about how we want to do that.
Yeah.
So. All right. So, did you have anything to say about that, Jesse, right now? Or?
So, are there specific roles or specific technical things you want to learn, like Python or some specific language or like a set of project that you're interested in for that?
I already know Python and Ruby. Python is like the only thing that I learned like in school, and Ruby I learned in a boot camp. Though I haven't like applied it to anything that's a big project yet, which is what I tried to do last month. Let's see. I actually want to learn enough like math, etc., to go into like the field of AI and stuff, because I've been looking into tech policy. And I like got this email from EA people, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you want to be interested in this like tech policy fellowship?" And I was like, "Gosh, I am, but I'm like I don't want to be that stereotype of like women only apply when they meet 100% of their requirements, and men apply when they meet 60%." But I do tend to like think, okay, like, well, now I try to offset that by applying when I meet at least 60%, because you know they usually like don't care, right? Yeah. Yeah. So similar like stuff that eventually leads me down the AI route, just because I'm working on a few projects with other AI people, with actual AI people, where I'm giving like the data and they're like doing stuff with it. Yeah. I would like to be able to be technical in that sphere.
Yeah, I relate to that myself. I haven't been the most technically AI involved person, but a lot of things are orienting me in that direction now and Joe anyway, including the fellowship. So that's good to know, because I think what I've been wanting to do, one of the things that I think will be important for the lab in general this fall, we talked about it different ways, is having a kind of a professional development component that's either just skills. Like, I think there's some really important skills of just like being a scientist or scientist adjacent, and talking about like writing papers and grants and like academic or research-based communications, and even startup stuff. We both have a lot of experience with that, actually. And a specific kind of technical or learning curriculum that's related to that. So there's a lot of things in the lab that come up, like some people are very interested in experienced in reinforcement learning, some people are very interested in experienced in Python, or parts of AI, and like Chris is not here today, but I know he's done a lot of things. We have people who have been like deep learning mentors at Neuromatch Academy, and I feel like there's a lot of space and frankly a lot of need and desire for just an ongoing technical curriculum as well. And so I think that's something that we can emphasis and kind of build out as things we want to do this fall. So I'm with you on that part of it. As far as roles and stuff go, I'm not trying to peg people to specific roles by any means, but more like stuff to do. Oh, and as far as like you specifically, Angela, like I basically see you as part of the lab and part of the AI ethics team. But like you're not limited in any particular capacity by that. So if there's if there's a, I think one of the things talking about the last, like, if there are things that you want to sort of have leadership over, like if there's something you're learning and you want to say, hey, I'm learning, you know, some kind of database management thing or part of machine learning, and you want to talk about that next week for 10 minutes about what you're learning, like, that'd be great. Like, you can totally do that, and that'd be welcome. But you don't have to do it either. It's just sort of like getting people opportunities to show up and present or do something other than just, you know, say, oh, I'm doing this. So I think that's one thing. But to zoom out from that and kind of go back to the main conversation with what Bradley was saying, yeah, I this week has been interesting in that sense because I think we're as close as we're going to get to let me put it this way. This week I actually met with someone from my old undergraduate university at Albany, and it was really interesting to talk to them because of what they're doing and how some things are matching with what we're doing for ourselves. I think I didn't put any of them in the document yet, I don't think, because I know Bradley put up this model builder, I don't know, description or role or position. And that's very true. I think we could totally use someone who is interested in building models specifically. But I think I'm also going to create some, like, almost generic internship-looking things, just both for myself and the broader public. I've had a lot of feedback. I've been hinting and teasing, hey, watch the space, I'm going to post stuff. I've been on Twitter and LinkedIn and stuff like that. And I've had a lot of people reach out just showing interest. And what I have in mind for that is basically a few things. I have a few different ideas picked out that I like to do, and I can go. I was going to kind of go over them and kind of flesh out some of my ideas about them, sort of, you know, during the meeting here. And I don't know when you'd want to do that, Bradley. Like, we don't do that right now, but I would say, like, there's some roles I would talk about and kind of would go over just to see, not roles, but more like, I don't know, positions or opportunities kind of things. Like, I'm writing out some more formal descriptions for them, and I don't know when you'd like to talk about that. That's something I can talk about at this meeting.
Yeah, probably after we'll go through the Slack review first, and then we'll go to that afterwards, and then we'll do everything else after that, so.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, all right. Well, why don't we go to the Slack review now? Let me share my screen. Oops. All right. So, you see my screen here, the Slack team. And we'll go through some of the new content here. This is one thing that Jesse posted in Cognition Futures. And that's this paper, Philosopher, or this article, Philosopher, his new book dives into the computational theory of cognition. So this is Neurocognitive Mechanisms Explaining Biological Cognition. That's a book. Then I don't know if we have anything in cybernetics. This is the Design for a Brain that I posted last week, in case people missed it. This is the Ashby book that he wrote in the early 50s. And the reason I put this in was because it's actually a pretty nice resource, you know, to go back and look and see what was going on back then, what Ashby was thinking in terms of cybernetics. It's actually, if you go back and you read through it, it's actually quite relevant to what people are doing in deep learning today or in AI. There's a lot of stuff on, like, regulation. He has this thing he built called the homeostat, which was a little machine that would self-regulate given some inputs. And so you can see that, I don't know if it'll come up because it's a pretty big file, but if you go to the, I think we did this last week, but I'm going to go over it again. He just talks about a range of different topics, and he puts together this theory or this design for an artificial brain. And this has been something people have been working on for 70 years now. And are we any closer to that? Well, I mean, in some ways, but in other ways we're not. Especially in this idea of regulation, we're certainly not. We understand a little bit about how feedback works, but we don't really have a good handle, especially in the symbolic sense. So W. Gray Walter was one of the people who supported Ashby during this. We talked about W. Gray Walter when we talked about animats, and the first animats were the virtual or mechanical organisms. And so you can see these chapters: the animal is machine, stability, adaptation is stability, and then getting into this stuff called the ultra-stable system and ultra-stability. That's talking about this homeostat. Iterated systems, disturbed systems, and habituation. So now we're getting into robustness. So, robustness is a concept that people have worked on in the last maybe 20 years, but Ashby's going and pointing this out 70 years ago. Serial adaptation, interaction between adaptations, multi-stability. So he's got all these different chapters that look like, they look very tantalizing even from today's perspective, because they have a lot of different, I think, a deep relevance to what's going on in AI. But, some of these ideas, of course, people have fleshed out, but other ideas, maybe people have not really been able to figure out what to do with them. So I think this is a very nice historical reference if you're interested in, especially in the history of cybernetics, but also of AI, and looking at how far we've come and what we need to do, and what the sort of the core things are that people have been wondering about for 70 years. And, some of them still haven't been really addressed in any meaningful way. So this is something that, I would definitely come back to again and again. Okay, let's see. Developmental AI. Is there anything in here? I don't see anything there. New.
Yeah, most of the updates this week for me, I put in open chat, ethics tech society in general.
Okay.
So I don't update anything else besides those places.
Okay. Yeah, so ethics tech and society. Here's. So this is. These were two things. Is this from this week? Yeah, it was. Okay. So this is the one. This is register here if you're interested in this. Oh, this is something I posted on the MozFest Trustworthy AI Working Groups. So this is something So MozFest is like a hackathon that Mozilla puts on, and I think it's virtual this year again. And you go and you meet with these interest groups, and then you in early 2022, there's going to be an actual event or a hackathon, and that's where you have this what they call a sprint, which is where you just start you spend a week or a weekend working on this problem. You have objectives, you have issues that you solve. You meet together and you say, okay, what are we going to solve this during the sprint? You come up with a bunch of issues, and then people go work on them, and they devote that block of time to working on this problem. And then at the end of that sprint, they report back, and people do sprints to sort of drive forward some of the work that people are trying to do. Otherwise it becomes very, haphazard, and people get to it when they can, and then it turns out that they can never get to it. So it's a way to kind of think through and join groups of people who are like-minded and have discussions. So this is an email that I got, and I have the screenshot, but I do have the link here for the form. So if you're interested in this, click through to the form and fill it out. So that if you're interested in that, and that's I think you have until September 30. So if you're interested, you can find out more. And I don't think you have any obligation to do anything. You can just join the call or find out more. So Jesse posted something here. Nice. I almost made a contact here in Boston with someone doing the AI safety camp. I haven't heard more details.
Yeah, I actually have. I might quickly share my screen to show that. Just because. Also, sorry, Angela, I had to mute you because of just the feedback. You can feel free to talk whenever you want to. Yes, I do. Hello.
Yeah.
So here it is. I think they finally updated this is. I don't know if it's open yet or they're just they're setting up because this website's changed since I've seen it last time. Do you see? I don't even see a date here yet. Okay. I guess it's already happening. I'm a little confused about the time. Maybe this is the wrong website, actually. I don't think it is, though.
It says AI safety camp.
Yeah. Is there... I think this is it. I think it's related to the EA less wrong stuff. At any rate, I don't know. I'm a bit confused now. At any rate, let me check really quickly just to see if I have it on something else. I met someone who's an organizer at the event, and I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with it and where it's I feel like I'm so close to finding this here. Great, okay. Nope. Well, I can't find it correctly. I think this is it, but I'm not sure. I know they're setting up. They're in a preliminary stage for the next round of the camp, so I don't know if it's quite there yet. No, I'll figure that out. But I had made contact with someone at the camp, and that would be very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff coming up in terms of the society stuff in general. The next link that was on in the Slack, you can, if you want to go back to.
Yeah, let me reshare.
What? Oh,
this
okay.
one here.
All right, I was looking different here. That conference looks pretty interesting because that's specifically about society and AI. And I believe it's in November. When is it? November 9 through 10. So that's kind of, it's almost the time of Princeton Vision, and there's a shout out to Princeton Vision. Former president for that, Mayu, did a lot of really cool stuff this summer, and they kind of took a gap year to work on some like climate change projects, which is pretty cool. But Princeton Vision will be happening again, but it's usually around November. But I think they're going to switch, to trying to do it in person in the spring. In the spring again. So it's not quite. November conferences always makes you think of Princeton Vision, but this is a very interesting conference where I believe it's just kind of a very open conference. I don't think there's any there's probably a registration, but I don't think there's any the agenda and details will be announced quote unquote very soon. I think it was a lot of the HAI, human-centered artificial intelligence stuff at Stanford is pretty cool. We mentioned them last week with their fundamental models work and effort they're doing there. So it's always good to keep track of that. And I think it'd be good for. I'll try to have a presence there, but hopefully, as I alluded to things later, I would like to have someone who is interested in AI, ethics, or tech and society, who could like definitely go there. So I'm gonna try to find some people who really want to do that. And I think also like I'll talk about that later. But that's pretty cool. And then the Tech Congress link is interesting because that's an actual fellowship with the United States Congress. And the selection process is starting very soon. And if you're interested in like really interested in government and ethics, there's quite a few rounds of interviews for it, so it's a big deal. But basically, it's about I don't know if you're. I'm not looking at the actual meeting screen right now. If you could open the link, perhaps.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat or.
Oh no, in the link.
Oh, this link here, the Tech Congress.
The Tech Congress link, yeah.
Okay.
And go to the About page, so people can see what I'm talking about. If you go to About in the top nav. Yeah, just about us. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the computer science engineers and technologists serve technology policy advisors members of the Congress and Congressional Innovation Fellowship, Scholars Program, and also Digital Service Fellowship. So there's a few different aspects for things they're trying to do, but like there's if we find people who really want to work as basically policy advisors with the government and have, some different. There's a really interesting group of people who is something that I know some people who kind of fit that and some people who don't. But if you want to work with the government, interested in trying to advise tech policy, this is a great opportunity. So I'll say more about that in the next few weeks. But I don't think I'm going to be doing that per se.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who are in the AI ethics community that I don't think really. I don't know if it's new, but it's not the most known about thing. It'd be quite a cool, thing to get into.
Yeah, looks like it's pretty good. I mean, you get to work with in different offices, and then you have this these different fellowship programs here, so it serves slightly different needs. So that's good. Yeah, so thank you for that. So that's Ethics, Tech, and Society. I don't think there's anything there. Our general channel, we have, looks like Krishna today, he's participating in Deep Learning Lab's 2-day hackathon, so congrats to him on that. Let's see, and this is something Jesse mentioned about this, he's meeting with the people at his old university about some of the descriptions. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And we could probably find some undergrads who are interested in machine learning, reinforcement learning, deep learning, etc. There's a small cognitive science minor and psychology folks, potentially bio stuff as well. So that's nice. You were showing me a little bit about that, and we will talk about that more in a bit. And I'm very excited about this because I think it's a good opportunity to get people involved in the lab. But you don't necessarily have the money to pay them, but if they're doing it for academic credit, then that's a little bit better because it gives them something tangible. The experiential learning part is good too, but I think it's also something that if they are doing it for credit, it's like they have it's like a regularly scheduled part of their education, and so they will, I think it'd be more fruitful for them. Plus, they can show that it wasn't just something they did informally, that they have like a curriculum that they follow. Because usually when you do it for credit, you have to propose the curriculum and say, this is what I'm going to do, have learning objectives. It's all very formal. And then this paper here, the MIC workshop, I'm going to show a little bit of what that might look like. I don't really have that much on it yet, but this is the paper. Well, I'll talk about it in a little bit. So yeah, I got that started, but I'm not that far along, but I wanted to get a little bit of feedback at least on it anyways. Let's see.
All I gotta say about the university stuff is that I met with them Wednesday, and I plan to be following up with them early next week. So this weekend will be a lot of... I kind of wanted to finish it last weekend, but it didn't work out. A lot of wrapping up the event description. I'm going to start posting a bunch of things for a lot of the events and roles and so on. I think now sort of this is the deadline for it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it looks like Angela had to leave. So thank you, Angela, for attending. Anyways, yeah, so, yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit here. So this is the open chat forum. This is, let's see what we have in here for this week. So there's this thing here. This is, I think it would be cool to go over things like grant application writing, proposals, CVs, etc. now and then also. I mentioned this with respect to a professional development curriculum, but there's nothing like nothing like being on both sides of the process to learn from it. So this is a tweet that Jesse sent out on reviewing friends and colleagues. Professional materials is one of the best things you can do for your own sense of effective communication. In terms of selecting and identifying fits, and by fits we mean like how you fit into an organization. Yeah, I think that's a good exercise, and I know we don't really talk about it a lot. I like to ask for a CV when people join the lab, but I don't hold them to that because they're pretty early in their career. So if you're like, that might be something too that people would do, maybe not like in the meetings, but like on their own. If you have like a resume or a CV and you don't really think it's very good, well, reach out on our Slack and ask, can you review this? Can you suggest things that, that I might add? And sometimes, if I interview them, or if I interview you even, Jesse, I can ask you questions about some of your things, and we can pull things out that, you didn't know you had done. So one of the things about early career CVs or resumes is that, people will put things down that kind of comes to mind, like degrees, and then maybe if they had a long-term position. But sometimes there are things you do that you forget about. And so it's good to like have that conversation, and people say, well, what about this? What did you do here? And you can like actually draw on that experience a little bit more and say, well, I did all these things. Like if we work on a project, you're doing a lot of things. If you're, participating in ethics and society, you're actually doing a lot of things to, you're building some slides, you're communicating, you're working together in a team. And so there's an output, of course, at the end, hopefully, and then you can point to all that. And as an early career person, it's important to sort of put that down in a relatively short space, but to make it very, explicit to people so they know, oh, this person's done a lot of stuff. So, did you want to say anything more about that?
No, it just ties in with what I said before about professional development, curriculum assessment in the labs, because I think that's so important. There's a very particular skill set, and I'm having a friend of mine is in a list of basically searching for jobs, but also understanding how to. They have a lot of experience, and it's whether you're someone who's early career and changing careers, whether you're someone who is whatever your approach is for stuff. I feel like academia it's such a niche way of communicating that outlets for learning about how to do it and how to get the context. There's a very sort of, some parts of it are quite esoteric at first. Like they seem almost like a hidden set of knowledge, and it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. And sometimes it's not even on purpose. It's just the communication about it is difficult. So when you like you just said, a lot of people don't understand how to put into a functional business sense a communication about stuff they've done. Like you could, people say, "Oh well, I was at the lab, but I really didn't do anything," or I worked on this project and I just have a little bit of experience here. And it's like that's. I think a lot of those feelings are feelings that haven't been fully educated or shown. Well, actually, what you've done is X, Y, Z, and it can be in terms of hours or just effort or just whatever, and getting it to a place where you can say, knowing sort of how to present your own personal effort is similar to knowing how to present the merits of the topic itself you're working on, and it's not a. There's classes in business writing, and there's occasional there's workshops, and I salute my former school for I saw some really nice looking workshops about how to write academically and about research. So you don't. If you're lucky, you have a mentor who really brings you into that process as an undergraduate student or as a graduate student. At any point in the line, there's a lot of literacy that whether it's how to write a paper or how to write a grant or how to talk about what you did in the lab. There's a lot that just goes in there, and I think having regular places to talk about it in a functional sense is awesome. And also important, important for the development of scientists, especially people who are, doing innovative and non-traditional things. I think it's even more of a burden for those people, or challenge or opportunity, however you want to put it. There's a lot of inertia in academia that's hey, well, I was a very traditional field with a very traditional topic with a very traditional whatever, and that's nothing's wrong with that, but that tends to not be a lot of what we're doing, because we're kind of blending and mixing and remixing and innovating and trailblazing, and talking about that is its own that kind of adds a whole other layer onto everything I just said before. And talking about that's important.
Yeah, that's good. So that's something we'll work on as in parallel with these descriptions. So once we get people coming in, I think that's something that we can talk about. Maybe onboard them in a sense. Maybe say, okay, here I have your CV. Maybe we'll review it and make sure that when you start, we know kind of where you stand, and then when you finish or when you're as you move along, we can sort of put things into your CV. So when you finish, or when you want to do something like get a better job or a formal job or whatever, wherever you are in your career, you can actually do that, and you're going to be an impressive person. So that's the sort of thing that we want to maybe connect with the descriptions. This thing that Jesse posted from today. This is the number of Vision Science Society abstracts with neural networks in the title. So this is one of these trajectory things again, where you have a survey of the conference, just the term neural networks, and this is in a vision conference. So this is studying computational vision, biological vision, and looks like that it's just kind of bouncing around here, and then it goes up to 25 from like 3 or 4. And, you know, we know that people were using neural networks back here, but it wasn't like, I think here it's probably deep learning, correct? With this huge increase. Looks like a paradigm shift and no sign of saturation. Maybe TensorFlow happened in 2016. So yeah, probably that's deep learning associated. It just makes it easier for people to implement the models. Or lagged response to diamonds. And this is a post here. Oh, yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's like a call for, you know, participation. So there, yeah, this is an interesting case where you have a conference and there's like this huge increase in the number of things on a certain topic. So like somehow at some point people just start adopting maybe TensorFlow or start responding to some call in the field, or because, you know, oftentimes people will make calls for like some new direction in the field. Like someone will write a paper like, we need to study you know, development more, right? Like, and then people will, you know, kind of issue a response to that in terms of output, and then, you know, it's sustainable, so people keep doing it. It's interesting to see how these, you know, technologies and different kinds of things like that really kind of push these shifts in perspective. Research questions. I don't think we have anything new there. Virtual reality, we have this here, which is a image from the Oculus main room. So I've been playing around with an Oculus headset this week. And it brings me to a point here, which is I'm kind of developing some VR resources. Kind of going from like, I have a couple of different options here. One is using like polarized glasses for different content, and, you know, it's 3-dimensional content. We also have you can buy very cheaply now a headset. Usually they call it cardboard headsets, but they're actually plastic as well, where you can put your cell phone in the in a base, you know, in the headset, and then put it over your eyes, and then you can use your cell phone if you get the right app and the right content. You can see these things. You can see what you can watch, like 360-degree movies. You can watch all sorts of 3-dimensional content and interact with it visually. And then finally, there are platforms like Oculus, which allow you to interact with 3D content with a set of controllers. And it's, you know, there's an onboard projection system. So this is like a spherical room here when you enter the Oculus environment, and you can spin around in a 360 perspective, so you can see this. You're in the middle of this room, and so, you know, and all the apps have this sort of 360 perspective, so you can move around all the way around, and you can see things in back of you, in front of you. So these are all things that we can do, and the idea here is that we could create content for this, or we could take content and use it. We could do all sorts of experiments. We could just do like cool content. So, you know, I think that's something that we could emphasize as well, is this development of a VR strategy. And it's, you know, VR strategy means that we have like these different technologies that maybe if people, because we're a distributed lab, if people want to start going in this direction, you pick a technology that you want to use. And I pick these relatively cheap technologies because people can acquire them. You know, you can acquire a set of polarized lenses for a couple $. You can acquire an Oculus headset for about $300. So it depends on what you want to devote to this. But you know, then we can create content and people can do things with them, and it makes it a lot easier to work with that way. And oh, yeah, I did forget about this one.
No, I just put that one in there because I didn't put it in any of the main chats. But this paper is something I made. It kind of fits with VR stuff. It kind of fits with a lot of things that I'm interested in, and I may look to get someone specifically to look in that, or someone who wants to focus on that, maybe a specific role that I advertise for. I haven't, you know, done a major dive into the paper, but basically embodied virtual reality systems to generate compassion and self-awareness and other things. And I think it's going to be a very interesting topic. And I actually know somebody vaguely, and I might follow up with them specifically, who basically uses virtual reality for clinical therapy in a psychology sense, or in a cognitive science, in a trauma, etc. related sense. And this paper is from 2 years old, but I think a lot of, like, just both from the psychology to the cognitive science to the sort of developmental to the what's it called? I don't know, abnormal psychology part of it might not be quite right, but that stuff, plus the actual technology that's being used to it and the sensors, I think there's a lot of just captures a lot of different things. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is a good thing. I'm not sure if that's exactly what I'm aiming for, but it's definitely. I feel like this topic captures a lot of, brings together many different components to that I'm interested in the labs, kind of doing some things around. So more about that later.
Yeah, I think this is great. So yeah, there are different ways, like, so the idea would be you could take a technology, you could create some content or find some content, and then you could do these types of, you could answer these types of questions. And so that brings me to the other thing that I have here for this. I think this is it. And this is a virtual reality GitHub repo. So I've come up with a number of different topics. These are all stubs right now with nothing in them really. But I wanted to make a list of these where we like have different things in here. And I don't have everything. I have embodied VR as like one thing. But like within this we could have like different things. Like we could have, different ideas for experiments, different pieces of literature, different like topics like self-compassion or something that we can investigate or think about or create content for. I mean, it's pretty broad what we want to do. We can't, I don't know how we might be able to run formal behavioral experiments, but you kind of need to have like, human subjects approval and things like that. I mean, that's something we might be able to do if we're really kind of invested in it. I don't know, but then people would have to have the technology on their end to interact with the content. So, and so then we have all these things that we can explore. We have to see what our limits are. Like first of all, something like parapolarized lenses. They they don't have a tracking system, but they allow you to see things in sort of three-dimensional world. But if you go to something like an Oculus or even like a cell phone cardboard, you can actually, you have tracking built into the phone or the headset. So you can actually, there are ways you can output like, tracking, head tracking data, positional data, and other things. You can also, create like where you have them view some scene and then you have them do a survey at the end. And it tells you about like, how did you feel when you were interacting with this? And there are different scales that people use, so we can get the scales out of the literature. And depending on the question, you find a scale and you can mock it up in a survey software, and then we could put together something like that. So all those things are possible. We'd have to work out details on a lot of the technical aspects, but I think it's something that's doable.
Yes.
Yeah, so you put that in virtual reality. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think that's it for our Slack review. Any other comments on that?
Nope.
Okay, so why don't we move on to the descriptions now? So this is the descriptions for the positions we talked about earlier. And then I have this document here, which is the model builder So this is where and this is just one example. I just wrote it up. I haven't done it. I haven't publicized anything yet, but I just wanted to provide like a template or maybe get some feedback on this. So we're looking for a model builder to join our diverse distributed team. As a model builder, you'd be responsible for taking ideas generated in conversations at lab meetings and among lab members and turning them into models and simulations. This is pretty broad, so you would get the chance to demo a model at the weekly meeting. Your efforts would be supported through opportunities for long-term collaboration, publishing preprints and journal articles, and maybe also potentially, if you are at a participating university, you might also receive course credit. I mean, we'll work on that, the phrasing of that. But so participating university would be like, Albany or somewhere else, where Illinois too, I have connections with some of the practicum people. So, these are things that you can do if you want to get course credit. That would be a motivational point. But this is the thing here too, is that we have a lot of different model types. And, I think in this position, one thing, you might look for is a person who wants to be a jack of all trades, where they they sit in the meetings, they listen, they take note of the problems. And I don't expect them to do this right out of the box, but just to build towards that, right? So you're sitting in the meetings, you're like, oh yeah, it's a good idea. I wonder if I could model that. And the idea is to get people thinking in that direction. So if they sit in a meeting and they hear people talking, and they do the readings that we have in the meetings, they say, oh yeah, how do I, maybe there's a model that we can implement for this. And then the idea would be we'd communicate offline and kind of work on a little mock-up, like say we're talking about some topic and there's an idea that, comes, oh yeah, this is reinforcement learning all the way, this topic, even though there's no reinforcement learning model it's mentioned in the meeting. So you'd go and you'd mock up a reinforcement learning model or an agent-based model, and you'd present it the next week and say, this is what we could, we could do this, we could model this problem as a agent-based model or a reinforcement learning model. And so we can do these things, and the idea would be you'd do this week in and week out, where you'd kind of work out maybe new models or critically follow up on some of the old models to work them into like a publication or some sort of demo on the internet. So we could have like demos where people would work on, really kind of niche problems that we just kind of identify and then build a tutorial or some sort of model. And so that's something too that would be nice. Would be definitely something that people would see and say, oh, that it's some really good work, and then something you put in a portfolio too. So there are a lot of opportunities here to really kind of learn how to think about modeling. So that's the one thing I'd like to do here, the model builder position. Then there are these other positions that we want to write up descriptions for. So we have AI and AGI history. So I assume that's the artificial general intelligence history. So this is like, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like looking at the trajectory stuff, the history.
Yeah, it's so this is not. I kind of just threw those bullet points on there to do it, but yeah, I don't have anything I can properly show right now. But what I'm planning on doing overall, and what I want to do this weekend, and have to do this weekend on many fronts, both for my personal web presence and for the lab. You can go back to that actually. That's fine to go back to the document. Is for the lab, I'm going to create a few things, like I mentioned about site maps and so on, But one thing is just a kind of a template for basically job descriptions. I'm just going to call them, they're not jobs, but I'm just going to refer to them as that right now. And because I've done this for a very long time in some other roles that I've had. So I know, like, kind of a very standard looking, you know, call. Here's our organization, here's the team of the project, here's some skills we're looking to develop, a project doing here. Here is a set of projects we've worked on in the past, here are things we're looking on in the future, here's how you could contribute, you know, like an actual description. And I think we've been hurting for that, and I think it's I don't have the crystallization of it to show right now, but I'm very clear to in mind about this. So I have a macro structure I want to do with that. I'm probably going to be using Notion as the base point for it. I think it will help structure a lot of things. So specific roles, AI and AGI history is more of a philosophy or history of science role. It's not actually a technical role, but I want to put it out there. There are people that are interested in it and would love to just, hey, like this, then that role could fit well into a lot of different projects here. Like I would love someone who just wants to study AI, maybe that they've been in cybernetics, which is pretty much related to it. Like you could, there's quite a lot of like someone who would love to spend or do a set of research projects over the fall in that area. It would be great to have. I would love to have someone do, some major collaborations or like be a contributor to a lot of condition future stuff in an auxiliary role, or just some presentations during the week. Give a 7 to 10 minute presentation every week on the history or whatever, what happened in the 80s, or how has, what happened, like the chart we posted about, why did computer vision mentions and neural networks take off in the last decade, But looking at that, I think that's a great and very doable thing. And I think honestly, there's just never been, I've never seen a job description like the one that I would put together for that. And that's pretty cool. I think people are actually hungry for that. I'm not saying we're going to get someone to do it necessarily, but like I think there's some, with your blessings, there's some kind of innovative and different kind of roles or things I like to play out there. So I think that's one of them. The next two are kind of not fit to a specific. They're just areas, machine learning. We could have a completely, agent-based model is kind of a model builder anyway. That ties with the above description. But someone who, like, I would love to get. We could probably get a few machine learning focused interns who just want to look on if they want to do research. And I think it would be, conveying. We're not going to teach you machine learning here, but if you want to learn machine learning and get research experience and talking about it and putting those things into practice, whether like it's with brain vehicles or a lot of our other projects around our topics of interest, and even creating your own projects, like they have the opportunity to do that. And the same thing for cognitive science. Like those two bullet points are pretty much topics, but I think what I want to do is have a specific, like what I'm envisioning. Maybe I can just write this below, just to kind of give you a sense of what I want to do. Like, I'm just going to use the word jobs, they're not jobs for the time being. Let's just say opportunity. It doesn't need to be paid, but like more like a Notion something or whatever. And we'll have let's make this just so you're gonna differentiate it. It'll have a there's the page all over a little intro to the overview, and then a list of opportunities. And one of those opportunity lists, like, I want to kind of have them a little bit hierarchical. And what I'm imagining for that is basically, you know, like the most hierarchical intern would just be, you know, oral intern, and that's sort of like you could join a bunch of projects or whatever. It's not specifically differentiated, okay, but then you could have team or project. Specific roles like cloud futures, so that at least like there's, and I don't know what we want to do. Like there's like there's very specific things you could do within that. It's still a manager at all today. And just sort of a place to show that what I'm trying to do with the job description is, and there's kind of a required website backend that I want to do, because it's extremely to me it's quite tied to, like, unless there's a coherent website where I can show people what's going on, it's not going to matter. And within the job descriptions, the postings I want to do, like, you know, oral intro, team, project background, past, like, for cognition future stuff, we can say, hey, we had a discussion group at a major conference. We've been at the Embodied Intelligence workshop. Like just so they know, hey, here's what we've done, and here's what we can do in the future. Okay, like that's very important. For lack of a better term, time commit, expectations, and obviously that's not gonna. I'm not gonna press people on that unless they get to, like. There's varying degrees of structure too, and sorting about how to talk about that would be its own thing. Like if you're doing it for course credit through UAlbany at my program, like you have to do they have their own structure because they know about it. Like there'll be weekly check-ins on their end, and you know there'd be stuff that I would have to confirm or deny. Not confirm or deny, that sounds strange, but like I'd have to give some feedback to that administrative institution. But I'm like, why I'm excited about working with them is because I know it would be. I've been on the student side of it, and I know what it's like, and it's quite reasonable. Like it's a really nice setup, I think. And just something like this. There's something else I wanted to put here, but let me see. Oh, sorry, I'm sharing my screen on the document again, the Word doc, just so you can see it. Maybe I should do that, but that's fine. Yeah. So if you could scroll up a little bit more. Oh, it's in the page break. But yeah, just so like just so you can see what I'm envisioning. I think having there's, maybe I haven't put it quite like this. There's stuff for specific teams and projects, and there's also specific there's a lot. There's ways I want to present it. I'm going to present it easy to like. I want it to be presented. I want there to be a presentation where it can be understood through the participants themselves what opportunities, what's going on in the lab. So it's sort of a self-referential organizational piece, and to do it right, there's going to be some other, like I'm going to make something I'm basically going to use Notion. I think it's going to be a hub to reference a lot of our other sites and create a unified place, and part of that will just be the job descriptions too. So that's what I have in mind. I don't have a lot to show about it yet, but that's basically what I was going for. Do you have any ideas or feedback about that?
Yeah, I do. So if we go back to this thing here, we have, yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is good. A lot of breaking this down into like the different teams and kind of coming up with descriptions. And then we have a website. We have like a GitHub.io website for the GitHub repository. So this orthogonal research lab, there's an orthogonal research lab.github.io that we have, and it's not. It's just kind of like a plain wrapper now with some older projects. I need to update it, but that's a place I think we can make use of and put this stuff out. So when people come in, we'll give them the link, we give them this thing, and then they can look at the projects. And then in terms, when you said a presentation, you meant presentation by them or by us to sort of talk about each project?
I'm not quite sure which that was in reference to.
Oh, you said something about a presentation that we wanted. Oh, they're like a presentation of their skills or how they might approach the project, or?
I'm not sure. I think I meant presentation as in just how our information that we're doing is presented to them. So not like I'm making a presentation, but like the presentation as a thing. Like if someone who has no context about it comes and looks at
right,
our lab or like a potential job posting, there has to. I think we do better to have a little bit more of a centralized. I don't know, something. I'm not going to redo the website, but more like just a kind of like a landing page,
yeah,
or a aggregate, just so like, you know, a lot of our stuff is so disparate and not like unless you know where to find the ethics team's page, like you're not going to find it. So just creating a place to go where someone's like, oh, I really like the lab. What, you know, you guys working on projects. What are the opportunities? What would I best fit? And like, yeah, someone could always just apply to the you know, a generic fall intern role. Yes. But if you want to find more specific things about it, having a hub for that and a sense of, like, here are the actual links where you can go and explore the MetaBrains model stuff, or the representation of brains and phenotypes, whole set of things we've done, or our Neuromatch Academy, you know, GitHub stuff. Like those things are. I know about it. I could show those things in, you know, less than 10 seconds. But for someone who doesn't know, who come to the lab and just doesn't know all the stuff we've done and put on the website, like there's a related component. And when I'm in presentation, I'm pretty sure what I was talking about is like there's a presentational aspect to doing this that like it would be immensely confusing to someone coming and not, you know. And I've gotten this question even when I onboarded a few people recently. They were like, you know, what, basically in need of a site map or a project or a lab map. And as lab administrator, I feel like that's my responsibility to do that. So if we're gonna have effective job stuff, I think that would be related components. So that's partly why I haven't. They go hand in hand, and I gotta flesh both of them out this weekend.
Yeah. I think, yeah, the first part, though, is to get the coherent descriptions up or out, like, so we can review them, and then when we're both satisfied with those, we can start to post them. And I think that's good to have, like, a place where we have the links. We have the links at the main lab page, but they're kind of, like, not described in any way. Like, it's like this link to this project, but people don't necessarily know where to go. So, like, for a specific project description, you'd have a set of links, kind of like what we had for the project cards, where you'd have a set of links for the project. So Model Builder wouldn't really have. I mean, I guess there'd be some links for that, I guess. But it's like, if you want to learn more about cognition futures, or maybe there's a project that straddles 2 or 3 things, we could guide them to those places. I think that's good to have that. And again, it doesn't need to be like a huge. We can just put them up on the central website, and then just have, like, we don't need to make anything really fancy for that, just legible. But I do want to keep it updated, because people look at it and they see something from like 2 years ago, and it's like they get the sense that we're not updating things.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something that I haven't been the best with this summer, because I've been doing so much other stuff. And that's why I would like to have an assistant lab manager of some kind, because some of the detail work and managing that, I think that's something to return focusing on, because it's going to affect what we can do in the next year, and I want to be able to do a lot of cool stuff here. I feel like we're in a situation where we actually are extremely abundant with stuff to do, and we need more soldiers. So
yeah,
that's what I want to bring forward.
Yeah, well, that's good. Thanks for that overview. I think that there's some really cool positions here. I think, like I said, if we can get some people, especially if they're doing like, at Albany, you said that they have a cognitive science minor. Something like this cognitive science project or this machine learning project might be a boon to them, because they don't necessarily get the whole experience at Albany, because they have the degree program is limited, but they're interested in it, obviously. So it's a good opportunity for them to get a research experience that they couldn't get where they are. And, that happens at a lot of universities, where you're either, maybe at MIT, where they have like abundant opportunities, or you're at another university where, if they have that specialty, maybe, but like, still, if you want to do something like developmental cognitive science, a lot of places don't really have too much specialty in that, just because, so I think that's good. I think that's another thing to think about, is like, we're kind of supplementing people's education. So that's...
and I think one of the benefits like that we can do is, like, number one, being remote is a huge advantage right now, and will be for a while. Number two, there's some really niche things that not everybody's going to go for, but like, if you find, like, I know where to fish, like, for the AI historian stuff. Like, you're not, there's, outside of like a very few select institutions, like, you're not going to find that. And I don't think someone's going to want to, like, I don't think I'm going to find the next AI historian, Nobel Prize winner in, well, Pulitzer Prize winner perhaps, in like history of science. No, but there are people who are passionate about it and would love to have structure and engagement about it. So I think there's a few, like, I want, like, there's, how I'm kind of breaking it down is like, there's very general level internships that you can just join the lab. You don't, I almost feel like they're, I'm going to create multiple descriptions, but in one sense, you know, the it's the same thing. Like you're going to be you know, signing up for a general obligation or tour of duty with us, yeah. But there's also some the finer detailed things about like model builder is pretty cross cut, and I think that's a very interesting way to put it, because I've never really seen. I've seen some job descriptions that kind of fit like that, but then like as a research based thing, it's kind of a nice. Like, I think we have a really cool opportunity to put some, like, different kinds of things out there. I've been looking at a whole ton of job applications for myself and for other people lately. I've been applying stuff and applying to grants. And so I have a pretty good sense of what's out there. And, like, you know, I kind of, like, I think if we have some good postings and advertise them and have a nice landing page for someone to explore the website, I think that's a pretty attractive thing. And you have sort of these generic level stuff, and so there's some really niche things like AI ethics is a little more popular now, and it's for someone to get experience in that field, like that's a big thing to have, even at undergraduate level. And obviously, people who aren't undergrads working on those projects here, but like I think that will be I don't know. I'm kind of excited about that. And I'm not saying we're going to get like 50 people showing up in the first week about it, but I'm kind of like really open to saying, periodically mentioning, hey, we have an opening for someone who wants to focus on, you know, yeah, VR stuff, or like there even within the ethics and society realm, there's like AI ethics is a very broad topic. I could see having a AI safety, which is a very specific domain, but we could have an AI safety internship. Someone who wants to focus on that and talk about it and work on a paper in that sense. We could have a, you know, there's basically technical AI safety and ethics stuff, like people who are looking at people who really want to dig down into like Tim and Jabru's papers, like that's legit. Or you could have people on the more policy or just non-technical side of things, and those are both. Like when I make some of my descriptions, I'm gonna do it with that in mind, just because I feel like in the team, in our sense, we know that there's an understanding that way, but it's like making the descriptions and differentiating them from people who don't know anything, thinking, oh, I don't know if I'm going to fit in because I'm not really well versed in the policy, or I don't have these technical skills. It's like, well, you can, you know, it's just there's specific avenues for you to contribute under this umbrella, and I think making those things explicit is actually really tough, but I think really, really, really useful for someone who's coming to a situation they don't know anything about. So I could ramble on about this for a while, but I think you see what my point is. And definitely, yes, the VR thing is something I meant to put in there for that now, so thank you for that.
Yeah. The other thing we can say is that we have, like, things you can do. So, like, you just mentioned this, and, like, you know, it's like we can do, like, bibliographies. And,
right, absolutely.
Like, what else did you mention? Non-technical, something. I mean, just have these, like, in bullet points and then flesh out what they mean. It just gives them a good, like, a focused internship, maybe. Just to give people an idea of what they can do, like, because people will come and not have much experience in research or in, like, doing something that's planned out. So if we can give them this, like, they could maybe go back, and if they're doing, like, a practicum, they can, you know, do an outline of what they're going to do much more effectively, or just plan it out. Like, this is what I want to do, because people will come in and then they'll say, well, I don't know how to do this or what to do, and then, you know, it's a struggle to try to get them integrated into the project. So I definitely want to give that too, and just give a little description of what these are, and then we can put that up as well. And then when we onboard them, we would give them like, you know, an introduction to the project they're interested in. And I think with respect to a presentation, you know, it would be like an onboarding thing. So like you'd have like, we'd just prepare some slides on each of these projects, these things you can do. And then like if we onboard like people for certain projects, and we just present on those projects and then have them like kind of say, what are your questions about this? So it gives them a starting point.
Yeah, and those are things that I wanted explicit in the job descriptions themselves, for sure. I think it also could be a way we talk about and share them in general, like there's a whole set of people. There's a whole set of people I would love to just invite to join the lab that are undergraduate or people who don't have a lot of experience or knowledge about a field, and say like, hey, if you want either potentially some coursework or just actual research experience and the right environment, the environment's huge. If you want a place where you want to just spend some time looking at, you know, development, either in biology or in psychology, and you want to do a weekly or a bi-weekly report on that and share that with the group and flesh out one of our annotated bibliographies, contribute to literature review, contribute to some papers. That's legit. Like we would benefit tremendously from having a number of those people on both like AI history, on a lot of non-technical skills for it, and exposing them to other people who are focusing on the technical aspects and having them in the same place. Like, I think that totally fits with both the personal development and a lot of, like, you know, very useful integration of communications, you know, and learning how to do that. It's like you said a long time ago about the lab, like it's important to be exposed to different groups within your study. Like, yes, you could be a policy analyst, but like Angela was saying earlier, knowing some of the coding and how to, you know, tune a neural network and how to deal with TensorFlow, like those are things that make you better at focusing on what you want to focus on. And that's a huge selling point for the lab, and a huge need. Like, those are real. We kind of talk about things in a you know, hand wavy or nice way, but like those are actual critical things for people's careers and for a lot of the fields of study we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree. So, yeah, let's follow up on this in Slack or next week. Let's actually, you know, do some more work on these descriptions and flesh them out and everything, and then
I especially with the long weekend, I'm going to try to I want to, very honestly, I want to get them toasted as soon as possible, because time's of the essence, and I don't want people to make all their fall semester plans and not have these, and I want to have them before, and I need to do that. So this is kind of priority number one for me right now. So I kind of want to go write them right now, but I'm going to stay here and do stuff. But
yeah.
I hope to have a draft for you to look over on a lot of things, and it's tough because I feel like we also have a discussion specifically about the U Albany form, and I've gone through most of that, but just like how you want to. I think the first step is finishing all of our descriptions, like we said, and then as we're doing that and going over the form, what to say to U Albany specifically, or what are you going to say to your own Chicago and stuff, like that's important. And in the meantime of that happening, like I can start. It'll be easier to just put together the landing page kind of stuff. So just getting the descriptions out is kind of there. Yeah, even like I'm still actually excited about like the data privacy event later in the semester, and how do we like. I have a lot of things in my mind about that stuff, so I'll leave it at that. I think we can move on to the next thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think is there anything else you want to say? I mean, but I think we've kind of established. All right, here's what we have to do now to advance this thing.
Yeah. No, we'll move on to some other things here. Let me share my screen. So I wanted to go over a number of things. So we're kind of following up on our submissions. We still have our document, and we have 3 things that we're working on right now. Well, we have the MetaBrain models paper that was submitted this week to the Embodied Intelligence ebook. So that's probably going to be some peer review points on that we'll have to address. And then this paper, the follow-up paper to the EI workshop for the Artificial Life Journal, that's a separate paper. Now, this is going to be a different paper than is listed here. This is going to be the developmental Bradenburg vehicles. This is with Jesse and with Stefan. So we have all 3 people who presented at the session are going to be authors on this paper. And I think that's nice because, it kind of takes like Stefan's presentation and our presentation and brings them together. And then we also have the ebook, so that's Jesse and myself going through the MetaBrain models, which is a bit different, quite a bit different actually. And so we have those 2 things, and I think those are nice representations of some of the work we've been doing in this group over the last 2 years or so. So
Yeah.
those are on the way out, and we're on track for that. This thing here, Gibsonian Information for the International Society of the Study of Information. So this is the International Study for the Society of Information. Actually, they're having the conference, I think this week and next week. So this is the website for that. Theoretical and Foundational Problems in Information Studies. So I don't know. I submitted an abstract for this, but not for the conference, but for a paper. And I don't know what happened. I submitted it to someone's email, and I think it's all set, but I don't know what the timeline for the paper is. But anyways, there's this Theoretical and Foundational Problems in Information Studies conference online, and that's happening in the next week and a half or so, so September 12th or the 19th. So this is part of this IS4SI summit, and this is talks about information theory, Shannon information. This talks about it from bit, which is an idea from John Wheeler, which is an idea of sort of emergence of patterns in nature from bits. And so there's, they talk about a lot of this like classic information theory, but also innovations in information theory. They talk about autopoiesis, information coding, digital computing structures, new mathematics of name sets, knowledge structures, cognizing agents, and structural machines. The conference consists of 2 streams, so there's the Theoretical Information Studies stream, and then there's this Foundations of Information Studies stream, so like the ontology of information, the epistemology of information, and so forth. And so if you want to attend this, I guess it's free online, so this is the link here, tfpis.com, and I'll put this in the Slack. Looks like they have some interesting sessions here. Information, neosentience, new directions in information processing, information and practical problems. So it's definitely like we didn't apply to present at this, but we did, I think, apply for a publication or a paper. I don't really know why this is set up like this, but well, if we don't, if we don't end up getting involved in this, it's, we can find another home for the paper we submitted this for. But if you're interested, I would definitely think about like catching some of this if you have time. So that's that link. So back to this submissions document. So what I was talking about in terms of the paper we submitted was this Gibsonian Information paper. So this is something that was written earlier this year for the CogSci conference. I didn't get accepted, but then I submitted an abstract for, it's actually quite a long abstract for the this information conference. And if we don't make that, then we can still work on this. And we have yet to make this into a preprint. So this is something I'd like to, now that we have a lot of the obstacles out of the way in terms of other papers and presentations that we're working on. This summer has been like crazy with presentations. We've had one like almost every other week on average, and it's been like between this and the other group I work with, and it's been like a lot of different stuff. But this, I think we're getting to the point now where we can focus back on some of this. I want to kind of go over this paper and like maybe augment what we have here with like some more like sort of formal information theory, like, you know, so this is, the idea here is Gibsonian information. We're sort of setting it against Shannon information. We're drawing from ecological psychology, and we're calling it Gibsonian information. And what we have are basically three sort of measurable phenomena. So we have like the disjoint distribution, contingent action, and coherent movement. Now those are three things that we're proposing that are different from Shannon information in some ways. This is similar to Shannon mutual information as A, which is the disjoint distribution. But it's not the same thing, because it's basically the idea that you have information that's disjoint, or you have noise and signal that's disjoint. But nevertheless, it still gives you information. So like Shannon information, mutual information, if your HY and HX, which are the two sets that we have here, don't overlap, then there's no mutual information. But in this case, in Gibsonian information, you actually have this difference, and the difference is actually the information. So I've tried to like work on some of the equations, and that's, I think, what we need for this paper, is to really kind of get some equations out, get some ideas about how this can be implemented, and that, you know, that sort of thing. And then this 4-channel embodiment model here, which I think I presented at the EI workshop, where I presented this model. This is like a symbolic model of different sensory streams. So we have, you know, forward motion in visual stream, forward momentum in the haptic stream, shifting left in the proprioceptive stream, and then the auditory stream, birds chirping, and these arrows represent different directions of where this is coming from. So forward motion is forward, the birds chirping are from behind, and you're integrating all that information. This rabbit has 4 channels, it's integrating all the information. There's direct perception, which is the solid arrow, and inferred perception, which is the dotted arrow. And inferred perception has to do with mental representation. So I think we've talked about a couple papers where there's this distinction made between direct perception and representations. And so we did talk a little bit about that on the MetaBrain Models paper, but I think it's worth bringing up again because, you know, there are two components here. There's the multisensory dimension where you have the different channels, and then there's this directional component, which is multisensory integration. And if you want to read more about that, there's a lot of work on like looking at how multisensory integration isn't just integrating different senses per se, it's integrating them in a certain direction. So like if I present a sound on your left side and a visual scene on your right side, and you're looking at the visual scene, the sound that you get is disjoint from the image. But if I bring the sound together with the image in the same spatial direction or spatial location, then it's more integratable by your nervous system. So, you know, there are these ambiguities that you get from, you know, if you hear, like if you're driving down the road and you hear a ambulance siren, and it's like you don't know where it is because it's not in front of you, you have to look around or sort of figure out where it's coming from. That's sort of the same thing. And so there are a lot of things with this as well that are we should really explore a little bit more and maybe spell out a little bit. And this isn't just useful in terms of thinking abstractly. This is actually ties very directly to virtual reality, and I think I made a note here. In playing around with the Oculus, I noticed that, like, you know, you do have a lot in Oculus. You have this 360 environment you can explore in your workspace. So you actually can put things, if you create the right content, you can put things in different orientations. So you can put things at the left or on the right, and you can do these sort of disjoint cues where they're not directly integrated in the same direction. So you have a sound coming from behind, you have an image in the front, and, you know, it could be birds chirping from behind and seeing the bird in front of you versus having the bird chirping directly in front of you. And so these sorts of things can pull out different aspects of information processing. And so I think, yeah, this paper is definitely something we should follow up on. It does need some more work, and I invite people, if you want to take ownership of some of it, you can become an author. We have 4 authors now, but this is something that I would like to do more of this fall. So that's that paper. Did you have any thoughts on that, Jesse?
Oh, okay, no, I'm muted. Not particularly, but it's good to see it again. I think we can continue to flesh it out, and I looked at it a long time, so it's good to see it again. I think there's stuff we can do with it, for sure.
Yeah, this is a good refresher. Definitely not something we want to sit on, though. So, so that I have something else here. This So speaking of virtual reality, you know, there's this 3D deep learning research. So this is kind of sort of adjunct to virtual reality, but this is where you're creating 3-dimensional visual objects, and, you know, you can build them using something like, you know, Blender or Unity, which are programs where you can do like 3D modeling, or, you know, you can sort of generate these from scratch, de novo. And so this is what this is sort of doing. 3D deep learning researchers can build on the latest algorithms and simplify and accelerate workflows using the Colin PyTorch library. So this is a new library for PyTorch. This is visualizing 3-dimensional data sets. So they're visualizing data that's 3-dimensional. They're able to build these different representations in 3D. And so this is something that would be useful for people who are working in 3D modeling, but also in building virtual stimuli. You have in this toolbox, you have different building blocks like conversions between 3D representations, useful 3D loss functions for training, and differentiable rendering. So these are things that, you know, if you're building an object from data, or, you know, you can build an object to animate it. I mean, that's just another tool in our toolbox, and I think it's pretty cool. I haven't played with it or anything, but I also, you know, I invite like people who are doing a lot of deep learning in the lab to maybe play around with this a little bit. They have this lightweight TensorBoard style web dashboard called Dash 3D, and this is the Dash 3D. Here, users can leverage this tool to insert checkpoints and 3D predictions produced by DL models. The library release supports new data sets such as SHREC and ModelNet, additional formats and speedups for the USD 3D file format. So these are things, again, that are very technically oriented, but these are, you know, things you would work with. So this is something that maybe, you know, people could explore and figure out how to get to work. I guess the idea is you train your 3D models based on a loss function, or, you know, you can train different models into existence. I don't really know what the possibilities are here, but it's worth checking out. Okay, so I think that's it for that sort of stuff. Now let's go to papers, and we'll finish up the meeting with papers. So
is that link somewhere in the like Slack or something.
Let me get the link. I can put it in Slack later. Let me put the link in here. This is for the 3D deep learning, correct?
Yeah.
That's the link. It's the NVIDIA blog.
Okay, I'll put that in Slack.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that would be good. So now we'll go to papers and we'll talk about some things here. I found some good papers on a lot of different topics, so we won't get to all of them. I'm going to talk about two today. Talk about cybernetics and complexity and active touch neurons and possibilities. So this is going into the cybernetics area. So this is a new paper. It's a new paper. Yeah, it's a new paper by Francis Heiligen and his group. And he's, of course, the person who runs the Principia Cybernetica on the web. It's this cybernetics dictionary. And he's done a lot of good work with cybernetics. I can't remember who he worked with. One of the top cyberneticists of history. So I don't remember who that person was. But yeah, he knows quite a bit about this area. So let's see what this is. This is called Goal-Directedness, Chemical Organizations, and Cybernetic Mechanisms. He's in Belgium. The whole group is in Belgium. Works with people in Chile a lot. So this is some of the school of autopoiesis. And yeah, kind of can't find the words right now, but okay. So the abstract reads, in this article, we attempt at developing a scenario for the self-organization of goal-directed systems out of chemical reaction networks. So they're working on these chemical systems. And if you go to the Artificial Life Conference, they have minimal chemistries and they have, compositional chemistries, and they have all these artificial chemistries. So this is actually a very active area. Would you have something to say, Jesse?
No, I was just copying basically.
Okay. So related scenarios have been proposed to explain the origin of life starting from autocatalytic sets. But these sets tend to be too unstable and dependent on their environment. Autocatalytic sets are something we haven't talked about, but it's a kind of self-organizing system. It's where you have these symbols and they kind of connect in this loop or the circular arrangement, and they build complexity from their interactions. So you have this circle that goes around, and it's built. This is very autopoietic, where you have these circular sets that sort of generate complexity from different components. But these sets are too unstable. We apply instead a framework called chemical organization theory, which shows mathematically under which conditions reaction networks are able to form self-maintaining autopoietic organizations. We introduce the concepts of perturbation, action, and goal-based on an operationalization of the notion of change developed within COT. Next, we incorporate the latter with notions native to the theory of cybernetics, aimed to explain the goal-directedness. So goal-directedness is where, of course, you're trying to reach a goal. And this is something that's very controversial in general. Like, if you have a system and it's not explicitly cognitive, like if I were reaching for something in a workspace that would be goal-directed, a lot of things we do, like going and driving somewhere or writing a paper or something else, is goal-directed, right? I mean, but then in systems that aren't cognitive, you see these same types of things, but then you can't really say that they're intentionally goal-directed. So there's this goal-directedness that's always been a feature of cybernetics. So like, if you're regulating feedback or regulating reference levels, is this something that it occurs as sort of this autonomous thing, like goal-directed, or is it something that resembles goal-directedness, but it's just simply regulation? And so that's the kind of thing that they're looking at with these kind of systems. It definitely involves self-organization, but is the self-organization intentional or not? So to test and refine these theoretical results, we present some examples that illustrate our approach. We finally discuss how this could result in a realistic step-by-step scenario for the evolution of goal-directedness, thus providing a theoretical solution to the age-old questions of the origin of purpose. And so there's this purpose theme also that runs through cybernetics, and there's this, there's the old paper on teleology. There's some other papers on purpose, and our general perspective is that of Beer, Stafford Beer, and that is the purpose of the system is what a system does. Thus, if the system is doing actions following a certain pattern, which directs it in a certain way, we consider such way its goal. So this is like, I don't know if it's like a difference without a distinction, but, it's definitely moving towards this idea that the system should move towards a direction of defining its goal under a variety of circumstances. The latter is known as equifinality. No matter the conditions one starts in, the system will always achieve the same result. So this is actually the opposite of like the initial condition in chaos theory, I guess, because in chaos theory you have this idea that the initial condition is important. If you see the initial condition, it leads to a certain outcome. If you have a different initial condition, it gets to a radically different outcome. And even with the same initial condition, and if you run the dynamical system again and again, you end up in different places. So this is actually almost the opposite of that, it seems. Equifinality, no matter what conditions one starts in, the system will always achieve the same result. So the idea, it's almost like what they call in developmental biology developmental buffering, which is that you have a number of different genotypes, but because the environmental pressures are the same, you end up with the same phenotype. So the genotypes are different, the phenotype's the same, you get this buffering that results in a similar outcome, just simply because the way everything is regulated brings it to a point, as a common point. So an example of the difference between external cause-effect and goal-directedness, consider the wind as an outside influence. An example of an external cause-effect is a leaf that is blown by the wind and goes in whatever direction the wind blows. And this is like a chaotic system. By contrast, sailing is a goal-directed behavior. The direction the boat is going does not depend on the wind. It can even go against the wind by zigzagging. But obviously, sailing is a behavior not isolated from the environment. It is using the wind to move in the wanted direction. So in other words, sailing is an intentional thing. If you're sailing, you're working against the wind, but there's a purposeful working against the wind. It's not just a random buffering against the wind, as it were. So you would end up you can end up with, the wind can take a lot of different characteristics. It can blow from the west, it can blow from the east. Sailing, you can get to the same goal. It might be a little bit, the path might be a little bit different, but they always converge upon the same goal because it's goal-directed. So this is, they talk about goal-directed behavior, some of the aspects of it, perturbations, actions, and then the goal. And this is a very common thing in cybernetics where people look at like these goals, so there are these goals that the cybernetic system tries to reach. It's also the case that that's true of machine learning as well. I mean, we have a target, right? We have a training set or a target that we want to reach. And we do this by, minimizing the loss. So it's very similar to that. So this paper kind of goes through a lot of this stuff. And I would read it if I want to know more about this distinction between goals and sort of chaotic systems. And I don't think they mention chaos in here at all, but I bring that out because I think it's a nice distinction. And then there's this, they talk about reaction networks and chemical systems. So if you're interested in that, you can look up the literature on autocatalytic systems. And so that's something that you'll find, autocatalytic sets, autocatalytic systems. And they have citation 13, which is this, there are a bunch of different papers on it, but it's basically this idea of artificial chemistries and autocatalytic sets and that sort of thing. So that's something that's actually widely applicable. They use it in social systems, they use it in other types of systems to look at self-organization. This paper is Task Complexity Moderates Group Synergy. And I'm going to go through this more quickly. But But this is a new paper by Duncan Watts and some co-authors. Duncan Watts being one of the a famous network science person who kind of developed the small world idea about 20 years ago or so, helped develop it. And so the abstract on this reads, complexity, defined in terms of the number of components and the nature of the interdependencies between them, is clearly a relevant feature of all tasks that groups perform. Yet the role that task complexity plays in determining group performance remains poorly understood, in part because no clear language exists to express complexity in a way that allows for straightforward comparisons. Here we avoid this analytical difficulty by identifying a class of tasks for which complexity can be varied systematically. We then test the effects of task complexity in a pre-registered two-phase experiment in which 1,200 individuals were evaluated on a series of tasks of varying complexity, and then randomly assigning them to solve similar tasks either in interacting groups or as independent individuals. We find that interacting groups are as fast as the fastest individual and more efficient than the most efficient individual for complex tasks, but not for simpler ones. So what they're saying is that you have these interacting groups versus individuals. And the question is, are these interacting groups, is there an advantage to being an interacting group? We talk about the wisdom of groups, but we also talk about the stupidity of groups in terms of like herding behaviors or things like that. So what is it about groups that are better than individuals? So for complex tasks, interacting groups are very good. But for simpler tasks, maybe they don't outperform an individual. And that's something that, like, when people talk about, like, collaborations, especially academic collaborations, you find this often. And I've heard this in a number of papers and talks where people have thought about this and they've said, well, you know, you have these academic collaborations, you have people collaborating from different disciplines, or you have, like, a collaboration of, 10 different labs. What is it that, in what context is that advantageous? And most of the context in which it's advantageous is by solving big problems like sequencing the human genome or some other like large-scale task. And so that's where those kind of groups are very effective. Now, in smaller tasks, if you had smaller questions to ask, maybe those groups aren't as effective. Maybe those kind of collaborations wouldn't really do very much with that because you have too many sources of input and other things. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of like what we're doing in the lab here, our interactions and our things that we're, trying to build like collaborations, what things can be done individually and what things can be done in a group. And so this actually, they talk here about the significance. Scientists and managers alike have been preoccupied with the question of whether, and if so, under what conditions, groups of interacting problem solvers outperform autonomous individuals. Here we describe an experiment in which individuals and groups are evaluated. We then precisely quantify synergistic gains and process losses associated with interacting groups, finding that the balance between the two depend on complexity. So the complexity of the task. Is it a big problem with a lot of complexity, or is it a simpler problem? Our study has the potential to reconcile conflicting findings about group synergy in previous work. So this is a class of tasks that satisfy these criteria are constraint, satisfaction, and optimization problems. So these are widely used, studied in artificial intelligence and operations research. These are these not toy problems like you would find in a typical setting where they kind of look at like a model problem that's unnecessarily simple, that doesn't really map to the world very well. CSOPs map in a relatively intuitive way to a range of practical resource allocation problems. So they use this type of problem to sort of evaluate this. So examples of CSOPs include staffing software projects, so open source projects, where there's several potential developer to activity assignments to evaluate, forming learning groups based on some criteria related to collaboration goals, railway timetabling, allocating vaccines, ventilators, and medical supplies. So those are problems that are hard to sort of solve using a constraint optimization approach typical constraint optimization approach. And so what it, are large groups interacting with each other. They generate the synergy needed to do this more effectively than the individual, or can the individual do this like maybe with an algorithm and with their own evaluation. So this is an interesting paper. You can go through it more if you're interested. Now onto this other topic here, active touch neurons and possibilities. So this begins with this classic paper by J.J. Gibson from 1962. He talks about observations on active touch. And this is, again, this is direct perception, and it kind of goes through some of the details of direct perception. Active touch can be termed tactile scanning by analogy with ocular scanning. So, one of the things about direct perception is you're scanning the environment, and the structure that you have is in the environment. So if you're a hardcore active perception person, you take the information is all in the environment, you take it into the brain, it processes it. You don't need mental representations, and then you have your cognition. But of course, there are other people who say, well, yeah, you need a significant mental representation or set of mental representations. The environment isn't enough to just give you that information. And of course, if you're doing something like looking at a bunch of pictures out of context, if you're trying to analyze those, you need to have a representation to tell you, in this case, a training set, or maybe something more complex to tell you how to interpret that. But in direct perception, in this case, you have this touch scanning where you scan your environment, you touch things, you discover the differences between things, you discover the different sensitivities, and that builds the representation of, the environment, and, it helps you interpret the environment, gives context. This paper goes through a lot of this. It's a classic paper, meaning that it doesn't really connect to a lot of the science that came after it, but it's definitely worth reading because it a lot of these older papers that sort of set the agenda are really useful in terms of looking at big ideas. So, there are different things that people have looked at in the past leading up to this paper. There were a lot of people before Gibson who looked at, different things like kinesthesis and, haptic sensation, exteroreception, proprioception. And then the idea is to bring these all together because these are different types of pressure sensing and touch sensing and pain sensing. How do those all fit together? Reflex coordinating functions. How do they all fit together into one model? And so we can go through a lot of this. There are different changes in sensitivity. I don't think he talks too much about sensory integration here, but yeah, it kind of walks through all of this, and it's really kind of a nice refresher in terms of what we talk when we talk about direct perception. It's definitely there's a lot here to go through. This paper here, though, is interesting because they talk about, and it's not directly direct perception, but it's this idea that spontaneous events outline the realm of possible sensory responses in neocortical populations. So this is spontaneous events that are being experienced or generated by electrical activity, and it's looking at the possible sort of sensory responses. So it's looking at this possibility space that exists in the brain and how it can generate behavior. So neocortical assemblies produce complex activity patterns, both in response to sensory stimuli, like we saw with that direct perception, and spontaneously without sensory input. So this is neuronal noise, the electrical activity in these networks. Sometimes there's spontaneous activity that is, maybe big bursts of noise or something else that actually is something that, it generates something that affects behavior. To investigate the structures of these patterns, we recorded from populations of 40 to 100 neurons in the auditory and somatosensory cortices. So auditory cortex is on the sides of your brain. They deal with processing sound. Somatosensory is at the top of your brain, and it processes a lot of the representation of your body, the representation of touching things, or proprioception, which is the position of your body in space. So those two cortices of anesthetized and awaked rats using silicone microelectrodes. So they look at population spike time patterns. Those are broadly conserved across multiple sensory stimuli and spontaneous events. Although individual neurons show timing variations between stimuli, these were not sufficient to disturb a generally conserved sequential organization at the population level, lasting for approximately 100 milliseconds with spiking reliability decaying progressively after event onset. Perceived constraints were also seen in population firing rate vectors, with vectors evoked by individual stimuli occupying subspaces of a larger but still constrained space outlined by the set of spontaneous events. So what this suggests, and they're sort of drawing out the space, they're saying given the activity, what is the output going to look like? Is it like predetermined, or is it a different set of finite states, or is there this possibility space where anything can happen given modulations of the activity by behavior and so forth, or by sensory input and so forth? So these results suggest that population spike patterns are drawn from a limited vocabulary. So this is again like a set of different states that maybe can be combined or that are expressed. This limited vocabulary is sampled widely by spontaneous events, but more narrowly by sensory responses. So in other words, you have this vocabulary of these discrete states, and the activity that's generated in terms of generating behavior, these spike patterns are they're sampled widely by spontaneous events. So in other words, if you have spontaneous events in that network, they have a lot of different outcomes, right? There are a lot of different possible outcomes it can result in. But if it's pure sensory response, or maybe sensory response with a little bit of noise in it, it can generate more like directed behaviors, or maybe a more narrow sampling of that possibility space. So a sensory response might result in one of two behaviors, whereas spontaneous events can affect multiple behaviors and initiate multiple things. And so, I mean, this talks about like intentionality and goal-directedness in a very interesting way, because you have goal-directedness, you think, well, we're doing something intentionally, and there's this input, and then there's this output that we can identify. And despite really not fully understanding how that works, we can see that, like, obviously if you have something that's coherent and not spontaneous, so if you have some sensory input, it should lead to some more controlled behavior. And that's kind of what we see here. It's kind of what we see. Any individual neuron functions only as part of a much larger population. As combined activity underlies an animal's processing of information. So you're processing information that's leading to an event. And so this possibility space is constrained by this information coming from the environment. That's basically what they're saying. And so that's one paper. Then the other paper, the final paper, is this interesting paper on this connection between artificial neural networks and cortical neurons. So I believe this paper is where they talk about, like, how do we capture the complexity of a biological neuron? Do we need a lot of like artificial neural activity, or can we just model it with a single artificial neuron? So the abstract is we introduce a novel approach to study neurons as sophisticated input-output information processing units by utilizing recent advances in the field of machine learning. We train deep neural networks to mimic the input-output behavior of a detailed nonlinear model of a layer 5 cortical parietal cell. And this is something you find in neocortex. Layer 5 is this place where there's a lot of advanced processing going on. So it's a very complex system in and of itself. It's has a nonlinear output. So this is something that is definitely different from, like, say, a single deep learning unit or a single neural network unit. It receives rich spatiotemporal patterns of input synapse activations. So it's receiving all these synapses from diverse locations and different layers of cortex, higher layers of cortex. It's coming down to layer 5, it's being integrated, and it has this nonlinear output. So a temporally convoluted DNN with 7 layers was required to accurately and very efficiently capture the input-output of this neuron. So it took them a 7-layer model, or 7-layer deep learning network, to model the behavior of this one neuron. Now, I should say that not all neurons are this is not going to be true for all neurons. This is for this type of neuron. But what they're trying to show is that sometimes you have neurons with very complex outputs, very complex sets of inputs, and you need to think about like how complex that input-output relationship is. And in the case of DNNs, we have these nondescript units that are highly interconnected, but at the same time, it's largely a random thing unless you work on optimizing the weights. But in this case, we have this nonlinear output, a lot of inputs, diverse inputs, and it takes 7 layers of this model to accurately capture the input-output relationships of this neuron at millisecond resolution, which means that you want to capture things at that fine time scale. You could throw like a neural network unit up against a neuron, and you could reproduce the output, but it might be very coarse-grained. It might be every minute you might be able to replicate the behavior. You might be able to, say, reconstruct an image from the rate coding of a set of neurons, but it would be very low resolution. So this is a very high resolution replication. This complexity, which we see in the number of units it takes to simulate this neuron, rises primarily from the local NMDA-based nonlinear dendritic conductances. The weight matrices of the deep neural network provides new insights into the input-output function of cortical parietal neurons, and the approach presented can provide a systematic characterization of the functional complexity of different neuron types. Our results demonstrate cortical neurons can be conceptualized as multi-layered deep processing units, implying that the cortical networks they form have a non-classical architecture and potentially more computationally powerful than previously assumed. This is a good paper, and I think we're going to have to add this to the ANN's, DNN's paper that we're working on, this quasi-review paper. I think this is interesting for a number of reasons, and it's interesting especially in light of OpenWorm, which is, of course, our organization where we look at C. elegans, and we look at the different, we're trying to simulate the nervous system of C. elegans. And so, in this case, we're not using artificial neural networks at all. We're just simply modeling the biological neurons in terms of their ion channels and their inputs and outputs. Now, in C. elegans, the neurons are much simpler in the sense that they don't have this sort of layer 5 of neocortex complexity. Generally, they're more simple, but they do have a lot of aspects of, ion channel regulation and synaptic inputs from different places. If you're talking about, like, say, for example, a circuit that is polymodal, meaning it takes in different sensory inputs and integrates them, then those neurons can, have a pretty decently complex output. So, in OpenWorm, we're not dealing with artificial neural networks. We're dealing with just modeling those biological neural networks. And there are other approaches like dendritic trees and things like that, where you have, you're modeling basically that. You're just using that complexity to augment your model. And so those sorts of models are good as well, but they don't capture other aspects of the nervous system. So there's a trade-off there, and I just think this is kind of a fascinating question. And this last set of papers I think is interesting in terms of linking like sort of active perception with sort of what's going on in the brain with behavioral outputs, and then how much complexity is in there. Do we need representations? Do we need to have like, big models or small models, or what's sufficient to model all of that? So that's all I have for today. Jesse, did you have any comments on any of that stuff?
No comments, but I'm glad to have all those papers. And as usual, please send them our way. My mind subconsciously is very much focused on the descriptions we were talking about earlier, so I'm making mental progress on that now, and I'm cooking, and I'm gonna watch my football team struggle today, which will be even more incentive for me to continue with things that I know I have control over in my spirit, influence, aka all that stuff. But no, the papers were good. I'm excited about stuff I'm going to be working on. I appreciate you're very good at picking out sort of these things that are related or seeding some ideas. So I think they were very good for that, as usual. And yeah, that's my general report.
Okay. Sounds good. So thank you for watching on YouTube. Thank you for attending, Jesse and Angela. And we'll catch up in Slack and see you next week.
Yeah. One more quick thing. I just updates from other people in the lab. I did talk to Shri recently.
Okay.
And she has, I'll follow up with you about that later, but there's some projects that she wants to work on in general, or the stuff that she mentioned about with Dick and their group and stuff like that. Nice glasses.
Yeah.
And are those for like computer staring at the screens?
No, these are actually polarized lenses. This is what I was talking about. It has like a red channel and a blue channel. And you can create these things called anaglyphs, which are offset images, the same image offset in these different color channels. And if you wear those glasses, they appear to be 3D. They have depth. So nice. We'll go through that maybe another meeting.
So, Shruti, Aaron's around but busy with some other stuff. Aaron, Avery, and Anusha are all in the mix still, but occupied right now. I heard a little. Krishna was at an event today, and what was I going to say? I'm still talking. I have some things in mind to say for Charlotte for later too. Oh, and regarding you, is there a specific time you would like to check in later this weekend or Monday about the descriptions and stuff? Like, I know we're all like have other plans, so I'm just trying to think if there's anything that's a time that's better or worse for you to keep in mind is the time to get back to you and talk about it.
We could meet like maybe Monday afternoon. This is a Labor Day in where we are, and so that would work.
My personal goal, like I'm going to try to have things set by tonight. At the very least, I want to get a rough draft of the descriptions in explicit detail, honestly, by tonight. And maybe tomorrow I can flesh out the front end and back end of the website or our web platform that's going to facilitate that. But that's my aim. And I'll give you updates in Slack about that, because I think that has to happen. So,
yeah.
And I'm very primed to do it. So that's what my plan is.
All right.
All right.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Take care.